About the spies, the most
Oh boy.
intriguing, if I may, but don't, part of the whole game is Caleb. How do we really use? Because I know our rule set has it, and you kind of briefly talked about it, but go in a little more detail about how to use spies as a game mechanic.
Very, very excellent question.
Welcome back to Compact Conflicts Convos. Today we're going to be talking with our good friend John and Caleb about politics and spies and how to incorporate them in your campaign. So, start with the general question here. Why do politics and spies even matter for the campaign?
Very, very excellent question. I think, much like how our last video was over weather, Nick, politics and spies are definitely slept on as well when it comes to wargaming. Whenever we think about wargaming, we're thinking about battles, these massive maneuvers across the campaign map, which are all very essential, which makes it very fun. But I really think this episode is more about if you're a more experienced umpire and you want to include even more factors to make it as realistic as possible, these politics and spies really bring it together. When I think politics, I'm thinking maybe I need to talk to the local mayor to get food provisions, linking back to our logistics video, to get food provisions for my army. Um, Maybe if in the Rev War, I'm a British commander and I have to roll to send a letter to Parliament and the King in order to get reinforcements. Um, and spies, of course, that we can go down many different avenues of that, but we're talking gathering intelligence, sabotage, infiltration. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about when it comes to politics and spies. What about you, John?
Yeah, they're politics, and I mean politics in general is going to play a part in it. Like you talked about the Rev War, something to consider is like your theater that you're in, or you northern, middle colonies, southern colonies, because you with the politics your your northern colonies were very, very staunchly patriotic, where your southern colonies had a much larger percentage of loyalists. So
Mm.
that's something you can kind of take into account. I mean, the southern colonies were they were almost fighting a civil war at the same time they were fighting the revolution.
Yeah, is that definitely would help with like a recruitment role. That's another mechanic of the politics, and at least in our rule set. Caleb, do you want to expound upon how to use that more as a game mechanic in a rule set for the campaign?
Yeah, I think politics, in our campaigns, we have a diplomatic role and we have an intelligence role. Both are linked to politics and spies. Our diplomatic role is, as I mentioned earlier, perhaps if you're playing as, we can say, a rebel commander during the American Civil War, you need a role to talk to perhaps one of the local state governors to get reinforcements. If you're talking about the era of Napoleon, however, if you are playing as Napoleon, you can directly influence how recruitment occurs. These political, machinations really depend on who you're playing as. Are you playing as a divisional commander? Are you playing as an army commander? Or are you playing as, for instance, the king in this scenario? All of these different factors in politics um, really affect it. You can also, if you're playing at a larger level, perhaps you can make deals with the natives. I know in our Rev War campaign currently, um, both the Americans and the British have had some contact with Native Americans, and most of that has been through diplomacy, those politics, sending letters, perhaps making backroom deals and whatnot. So it can really, really add a lot of flavor to the campaign rather than just you two are enemies, have at it.
Or in the case of our recent campaign, had to send one of our officers to to actually negotiate and lead the native band.
Yeah.
Is so here's another question for the umpire. You kind of mentioned him earlier, but if one's umpiring a campaign, is it pretty safe bet to maybe use some historical influences? I'm thinking Civil War, Trent Affair. Um, I know in our Rev War one that John just mentioned, that was Chief Dragon Canoe, and he was doing his thing. I kind of missed part of that in the campaign, but using historical references kind of be a good base, or maybe just let the players go wild.
I definitely think if you're setting in a historical campaign, you need to begin the campaign with the political setting already established, right? You can't enter, let's say, the 7 Years' War with Frederick the Great. You can't enter it with Frederick the Great at war with England and allied with Austria, for instance, right? You need to probably have some kind of historical basis for this, just to make it work well, because sometimes the history is much more fun than fiction ever could be. Um, so I definitely think to ground it in a historical basis would be the best option to go through that. What do you think, John?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Civil War, it would definitely change the dynamics if you like your first role was, hey, let's emancipate. That would very much change the dynamics of the whole thing. If you keep it historical, you have to kind of work within that system.
I agree. Is what about some other uses in politics that the club has done? I'm thinking of my draft riots in Philadelphia, reacting to Congress in our Northern Colonies campaign. Um, how would one incorporate some smaller details like that in there? Do you roll a d20? How do we do that?
How to incorporate politics into smaller campaigns?
And like the more theater based ones that John had mentioned, Northern, Middle, Southern
Hmm.
colonies, things like that, militia roles, what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, the Southern colonies had as John mentioned earlier, basically like a miniature civil war going on down there. So perhaps the British have an easier time gathering militia in that region. Whereas, let's say the British are fighting in, I don't know, Connecticut, then the American militia would be able to be raised a lot more efficiently and quickly versus the British, right? So now the British really only have regulars. You don't have too many loyalist units there. That could also influence the amount of intelligence you are gathering as well. The the percentage of false information the British might receive in the northern colonies might be far higher than in the southern colonies where they actually have sympathizers. I know in our campaign, we have a we have a drunken fisherman working for the Americans, for instance, right? Which is just an example of those diplomatic and politics roles. Congress has deemed fit, middle colonies, my bad, has deemed fit to issue that out to the American players. So I definitely think theater specific works very well. And you could even translate that even into the Napoleonics. If we're in Spain, Napoleon's invasion of Spain, the Peninsular Campaign, the French aren't getting any militia in Spain. They're it's nearly impossible, right? But let's say they are in Germany, then perhaps they get volunteers or conscripts from some of their German clan states, like the Saxons. So I definitely think based on the time period and once again the historical setting, you can really increase that recruitment factor based on the location for sure. Location, I really think is the big thing when it comes to these politics. You can't. It's not a catch all be all across all theaters. It's very situationally specific.
Well, yeah, even like you mentioned, the even Civil War campaign. You figure look at the state of Tennessee historically. You know, West Tennessee was very staunchly secessionist. Middle Tennessee was kind of in the middle, and East Tennessee was very staunchly Unionist. So that could potentially factor in, um, like you said, with what percentage of your intelligence is going to be good. If federal soldiers coming down will get a lot better intelligence in East Tennessee and possibly Middle Tennessee than they would coming into West Tennessee. Something to consider there.
Yes, I agree. Here's two things that I don't think our club has done, mainly because we haven't. Well, one, we haven't branched out into that era to where it'd be more applicable, and the other one, I don't even know
Yeah.
why we haven't done it. Is what about a faction influence? Because the older faction, it wasn't like the Allies in World War II, one supreme commander. It was traditionally who was militarily the strongest got to lead, and then the faction fluxed all the time because people's
Mm.
interests were different. What about something like that, or maybe even rival generals? As me and you, Caleb, we're generals and we just hate each other. But John's also on our team and he's a general. And then he's over there picking a side like, I like Caleb's team a little more. I like Nick's team a little more. Something like that.
Yeah, I definitely think having even a little bit of competition, even with your own side, would be very fun. I think whoever's running the game, maybe they say, "Hey, the British might have this criteria to win the war, but let's look at the British players themselves. British players, whoever wins the most amount of victories gets perhaps, let's say, a seat at the king's court or however, right? So you have this overall objective to win the war, of course, which, how many battles or whatever it takes to win the actual campaign. But you could also have small sub victory objectives just for the generals themselves. If every other general is dead by the end of the campaign, then I look like the top dog, for sure. As far as including faction elements, a really good example I can think of, and a friend of ours is actually working on a rule book for this time period, the Great Northern War. That's a very slept on war for sure in the early 1700s, and the big fighters being Russia, Sweden. But they also have sub factions like Denmark and Poland, the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth is kind of under the Russians. Like they want to be this high and mighty top dog. Whenever they get smashed by the Swedes in the early part of the war, they quickly realize that they probably need to fall underneath Russian command and Russian doctrine. So if you're playing as the Poles, you'll probably have to follow orders from the Russian player. And then eventually the Poles get smashed and then they flip sides and they have to assist the Swedes. So now maybe you have to take orders from the Swedish player. You're kind of like an auxiliary force. We can kind of see that too in the Napoleonic Wars whenever Napoleon smashes the Prussians at Jena, Auerstadt, that the Prussians now have to fall underneath Napoleon's alliance. And that's why, same thing with the Austrians too, right? And that's why you see Prussian and Austrian troops invading Russia with the French because they have pretty much now become their own powers. They're subservient powers to the French. So I definitely think faction influence would be a very fun thing to play in a campaign. Hopefully we get to do it soon.
John, any thoughts, sir?
Well, the faction thing you were talking about, if you look historically, I mean, look at the Revolutionary War and the infighting amongst the Continental generals, especially. You see a lot of infighting there. Civil War, especially Army of Tennessee, was terrible about infighting, and Army Northern Virginia as well. And then on the grander scale, I mean, like Caleb mentioned, the general that does well can potentially come out on top. I mean, look historically, Battle of Shiloh, I like to give as an example for something like that, where even though Grant just barely snatched victory from the jaws of defeat at Shiloh and was relieved of command by his superior, and then President Lincoln reinstated him, saying, "I can't spare this man. He fights while others are put to flight."
Yeah.
Because I mean, you saw this a lot. A general they get their teeth kicked in, and they'd be replaced.
World War II, you had 90 days to, put a product on the field, essentially. 90-day
Yeah.
wonders for officers. But shifting gears just a little bit here, let's talk about the spies. The most
Oh boy.
intriguing, if I may, but not part of the whole game is, Caleb, how do we really use, because I know our rule set has it, and you kind of briefly talked about it, but go in a little more detail about how to use spies as a game mechanic.
Yeah, so once again, this is really a mode you can only really use if you have an umpire, because the enemy doesn't need to know. If it's only two guys playing, one on each side, you can't really say, "I have a spy here, by the way. Tell me what they learned." Um, the umpire has to be the one tracking this. The way we've implemented the spy, or how I do anyways, is I allow each side to have up to one spy at a time, and I have a D20 chart. And I roll. If they say, "Hey, I want a spy to infiltrate, let's say Charleston," then I'm like, "Okay." I roll the D20, and each number equals something. So I think 1 to 4, the spy is caught. Maybe they're tortured, and they reveal some information about you. But then if you roll a natural 20, they easily assimilate into the population, and they're feeding you information constantly, very reliable information. Maybe a 5 to 10, they feed you information, but it's not reliable at all. So now you're getting a terrible picture of the situation. I definitely think spies um, don't need to be overused. That's why I make the one spy rule. Now, once that spy dies or is captured, I let you use another one. But the umpire can be tracking 5 different spies, 5 different roles. But these spies don't have to be just for intelligence as well. We haven't really implemented it, but spies can also be used for sabotage. Spies can be used to help mislead armies, perhaps infiltrate an army as well. So perhaps you blow up, you send a spy into, let's say, Baltimore, which is being besieged, and they blow up the storehouse that's there. So now instead of taking 10 turns to starve and to surrender, the enemy now has 3 turns, right? So you can speed up that siege. Same thing. Maybe they spike the cannons that are there, sabotaging enemy guns, and they don't realize it until they get onto the field of battle. So I definitely think spies are a very fun and lucrative thing to have. I know we've had a lot of fun with it. I think Nick, you've used a spy for a very interesting thing in our Middle Colonies campaign. I won't repeat it here, for it might not be savory for some of our younger viewers. But let's just say that spy was doing anything he could necessary to get information from the British, if you know
He
what
was
I
an
mean.
ardent patriot. We're erecting a
Yeah.
statue for him right now.
Oh, what about you, John? What do you?
The spy was really pumping them for information, right?
There's, there's something. Is
Uh,
yeah, John.
I know.
What about you? I apologize.
No. No, it's and and the other thing is, on the flip side of it, is you kind of have to be cognizant of there might be a spy in your midst,
Mhm.
um, or even if not a spy, people that are local intelligence, that you kind of have to take that into account sometimes. Possibly move your troops over here. Just do a little bit of bait and switch from time to time.
I agree. Is Caleb? You kind of already answered one question for me. Was how do you pick the number to use? You kind of answered that one, but let's go into I've rolled for my spy, right? Let's just say I get a natural 20. Okay. I've got to kind of lay out his mission, don't I? I can't just be like, I want him to do, just be in New York City and party it up, right? Or be in Charleston, party it up. I kind of got to lay out that mission. Is what all missions can the spy do? I know you hit sabotage, but what other missions can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the spy isn't, is not like James Bond, where he, can do the mission and more than what you ask of him. You need to give that spy very specific taskings, because if you just say, "I'm sending a spy here," and then you're like, what did my spy find out? The umpire's like, well, you didn't tell him what to do, so he only sent you maybe supply reports, and you find out that the British got 50 uniforms from England into the harbor. You definitely need to lay out his mission. You need to be like, I want this spy to infiltrate here, with his first orders being to tell me the exact composition of enemy forces within the town. Or I want this spy to lay low here and just observe how many troops come in and out and what location they're going. Generally, whenever you send that spy into a town for a mission, I make you roll for it. And every time you change his mission, I make you roll for it again every time you change his mission. And we haven't really gotten into the point where, spies gain experience and therefore they have an easier time at these things. That'd be a really cool thing to implement. But those are just some examples of things they can be used for. I've mentioned infiltration, sabotage, perhaps even planting false information on purpose, right? Maybe you could, I don't want to say double agent, but kind of double aging it. Maybe feed the enemy false information, whether that be forging dispatches, misdirect the enemy army, maybe turn some road signs around. So there's just some examples of what spies can be used for. What do you think, John? Is there anything else additional, perhaps Civil War specific?
Yeah, I mean, spies in the Civil War pretty much operated in the same capacity, just intelligence gathering, possibly sabotage. Something to consider too might even be a little unsavory, but poison enemy general.
Oh,
Possibly assassination.
that would be
I've never even
very
thought of
difficult.
that, but I do like that.
I
Nathan and JT are about to
was
get
gonna say,
poisoned. I don't know what to
I
tell
was
them.
like, well, Nathan always says that he loves my imaginative spirit because I can think outside the box. Sometimes he tells me, let's get back in the box real quick.
No, I mean, I get it. That's the purpose of having the umpire, the campaign, and everything is. So here's one. I think we touched on it just a hair, but why would I want to use spies instead of local intelligence? I'm thinking Civil War. I've got a cousin in Baltimore. I've got a cousin in Vicksburg. Their families are exchanging letters. Maybe somebody, comes up, talks to you. Rev War, I'm always a fan of talking to a local merchant. They're traveling. Civil War, they're still traveling merchants. The other eras, I don't know enough about them to speak intelligently. But why use a spy over local intelligence?
I think local intelligence most certainly has its place. Let's say the army's moving south, and I roll for local intelligence, and the umpire tells me, "Hey, a farmer stopped by, said he might have saw blue-coated infantry marching a few miles south." Right? I think local intelligence is a good way to kind of get a feeling of the situation, but keep in mind it's not reliable, right? If you're the British and you're in the northern colonies, local intelligence is going to be, or reliable local intelligence might be very hard to come by. Whereas spies, these are directly working for you, unless I don't know, the enemy rolled a nat 20 to turn them into a double agent. But these spies are working directly for you, so you know that if they come back and they tell you, they're like, "Hey, boss, I don't see anything here." There's nothing there for the most part, right? They might give you some wrong information, but I would rather take wrong information than false information.
Right.
Is John
And
any
kind
thoughts?
of like
Oh,
you said,
apologies.
kind of like we talked about before, the location, kind of tells you which route you should go, whether you can trust local intelligence or whether you need to possibly employ a spy.
Mhm.
Like you said, or like we said before, uh, Revolutionary War and Southern Campaign, it's kind of, it could go either way there. Whereas the northern state or the northern colonies, it's very much pro rebel. Um, Civil War again, your border states, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, just kind of depending on what part of that state can determine, could potentially, I can't even talk today, could potentially tell you how reliable your intelligence will be from the local sources.
Yeah, I mean, you probably couldn't have a Confederate army, I don't know, let's say marching into Ohio, and then every citizen comes up and says, "Oh, I saw the Yankee army over there. Trust me, trust me, trust me." I don't think, and just quite sure the Federals are down in Alabama. I seriously doubt they're going to tell them where all their boys are. Right, so I can definitely understand that.
No,
Well, I mean, another example would be Missouri. Because you had the pro-Union Missouri State Guard, or I'm sorry, Missouri Home Guard, and the pro-Southern Missouri State Guard, in addition to federal and Confederate units operating all over the state, and certain also your ethnic groups too. Your German German immigrants and German descendants tended to be more pro-Union during the war versus maybe your Scots or your Irish descendants or immigrants would have been a little more pro-Southern.
it's about all the questions I can really have for politicking and spies in the campaign, unless y'all have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I would definitely say whenever you're looking into politics, I would say definitely try to include that in your campaigns. Rarely was war just one side, find the enemy army and destroy it, right? I know throughout this series, we've talked about how to increasingly bring in realism into your war games and into your campaigns. I would definitely say include a lot of things, include, alliances, maybe alliances fall apart. Bribery of local officials, support from other nations, right? Maybe, the big thing I can think about is the American politics with France during the Revolution, right? That we get that French support. Faction influence, you could have voting systems, civilian unrest. Maybe there's been some draft riots due to local defeats, and you keep trying to pull more manpower out of the same area, you get that war exhaustion. So I would definitely say including politics and spies, though it is not a major piece of wargaming. I think it adds just enough flair because I can tell you right now, as the British player in the southern colonies, the war in the South is not just us fighting the Americans. When I find out that the French are now at war with me, I'm like, oh crap. And then I find out, oh, the Spanish are now at war with me, and now they're invading Florida from Louisiana. It's kind of I kind of forgot about the politics, and you can't really do that.
And then the same time that's going on, we have a payroll dispute kickoff in Savannah.
Yeah, where some corrupt officers started taking all the money from the regiments, and then we had I remember that. They all deserved it.
It can add some interesting dynamics to the gameplay because you're doing really well, and then all of a sudden, crap, I got to go deal with this.
I like it, boys. Is next week, I believe we're going to be talking about either infantry or cavalry and how to use those units best in a campaign, a set battle. Maybe talk a little bit about how we use them with our rule set. But until then, thanks for stopping by.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.